Hello there, product people. Welcome to the show that supercharges your abilities to become better thinkers, makers, and leaders. I'm your host, Alsawi, and I'm thrilled to have you join me for this exciting episode of Product People. In this episode, we'll be exploring how product communities can bring value to organizations and meet the needs of their members. So whether you're a product person, a community leader, or simply someone curious about the role of communities in creating human-to-human connections, you're in the right place. As always, you can expect an honest conversation, valuable insights, and meaningful advice that can fuel your own journey with product, design, and leadership. Let's dive right in. Today, I'll be speaking with a product management leader and a longtime member of the Vancouver product community. He's currently a community leader and product evangelist at Hive MQ and previously the head of community and product evangelism at Product Board, where he led and nurtured the product makers community. He previously led the product and UX team at Thinkific, Finning Digital, Yellow Pencil, Central One Credit Union, and others. Outside of work, you'll find him creating synthwave music under his pseudonym Giants Killed Patrick. Without further ado, let's welcome the awesome Scott Baldwin to the Product People podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
I hope I didn't butcher some of the names of the company.
No. He did great on everything. And it's a lot of names. Many of them obviously made up kind of things sometimes. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you. Now, before we get started, I'd love to share how we met, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
We had a mutual connection who tagged me on LinkedIn in response to a post that you've created. And you were looking for speakers for a community event that you were organizing. Adam, if you're listening to this, we're talking about you. From there, we built a relationship and had many interactions beyond the context of the organizations we were involved in at the time. And here we are on this podcast together.
Yeah, reversing roles, I guess.
Yes. Now, reflecting on your professional journey, if you can walk us through the inflection points or pivots you've experienced in your transition from digital production to UX, then to product management practice, and then later on leadership, and finally to community building and evangelism.
The journey has been circuitous and certainly not a straight line. I would certainly not describe it as planned either in a lot of ways. Originally my background's in music. I played professionally and was educated as a musician. And eventually left the music business kind of around the time when I guess maybe the business was changing from people going to see bands to maybe listening to a DJ, you could say. I got out maybe at the right time, the right moment. And I fell into, of all industries, the book industry. I was always a lifetime reader and really enjoyed, the tactile nature of a book and the joy that it brought a lot of people. And I spent a number of years working in the book industry here in Canada. I worked at Chapters. I worked at Duthie Books here in Vancouver. I ran marketing. I did, all kinds of different things, events and all kinds of different stuff along the way. And eventually ended up at a book publisher. And when I was at the book publisher, that's when I kind of got my exposure to the internet. Started dabbling in HTML, and these are very early days of the web, right? The community was very around the internet and around the web, and what you could do and how you did it was very approachable, very, very available. The first project I worked on was for one of the actors on the X-Files, which was being shot here in Vancouver. And I did his fan site. It was kind of fun. It was a neat little side gig, and he's a guy named Dean Haglund. He's a comedian. And, that basically led me to my first job in tech in the early days of the .com. And I was very fortunate to land at a company that was building a platform for broadcasters. It was a convergence platform in the days really before we had things like, the phones, the wonderful phones we carry in our pockets and all the things that we take for granted today. I guess it was a little bit ahead of its time. But I got exposed a lot to the product management principles there. I got introduced to people that were actually doing real product management at that time in Silicon Valley. and got exposure to, I guess, maybe how people were starting to think about the practice and the work that we were doing on that end. That led to a number of different roles in different companies doing product user experience work. I kind of flip flopped, I guess you could say, between the two of those. Partially, everything always came back to like trying to make it easy for the user to use, and so the UX side kind of came out a lot. And I really enjoyed I guess you could say the discovery part of it, and the synthesis, like actually uncovering, kind of that like core user problem or core user need, and progressively that became part of the product management discipline, maybe, or got clearer that was part of it. And so I brought that sort of qualitative side along with the quantitative experience to the work of product management. And yeah, I was very fortunate to be in a number of different product management roles here in a few different spaces, ed tech, fintech, heavy machinery and equipment, e-commerce, a bunch of different things. And then I joined Product Board. And Product Board was 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I guess, almost four. And was obviously a perfect fit, right? Kind of a dream gig. You get to talk about product management all day to product management people because you were a product manager is pretty easy, pretty fun. And I love the product. I was a customer at that point in time, and I guess you could say I was almost an evangelist without being on their team. And so that role I joined originally more in a kind of a strategy function, and then shifted over more to this community building and evangelism side as things went along. But yeah, it's been, I guess you could say, uh, you know, very few careers these days are probably a straight line from you go to school, you study this, you come out, you end up like this. And I think if you talk to most people in product or design or user experience roles or whatever roles, they're probably very similar in their backgrounds. They came from lots of different places and learned lots of different things along the way, and maybe embraced certain opportunities when they came their way that maybe directed where their career went.
Lots to unpack there.
Hmm.
I think what I want to start with is maybe asking you about what does community mean in the context of product people, in the context of product managers, designers, people that work on not only discovering but also building great products. And if you can give me some examples
Sure.
on what does community mean here in this context.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can mean a couple different things. So maybe I'll take it from the lens of the product manager, and I'll take it lens from the lens of maybe the community itself.
Okay.
I think as a product manager, I think what community means for product people can be quite wide and varied. It can be more like finding people like me, so finding my tribe, you could say,
Mhm.
and that might be people in your local jurisdiction, like TPMA is a great example in the Toronto area where you are. Product BC is a great example here in product in British Columbia and Vancouver. But essentially, these are often like associations or groups or nonprofits or something like that that are attempting to bring together people that are playing this particular role, and helping them be better at the role, but also meet other people in that space that are doing that role. And that can take a lot of different shapes, right? I mean, it can take the shape of helping exchange ideas about your practices. It can be about exchanging job opportunities. It can be giving talks and providing thought leadership. It can be just companionship, frankly, for a lot of people. I mean, there's
Mhm.
a lot of product managers working remote gigs, right? That don't have maybe even a local team in some cases, that they can kind of lean on for advice and critical input. Sometimes it's a degree of safety too. I'm part of a number of communities where that safety is really important. It gives people a comfortable space in which to talk about their craft and the challenges they're running into, or that difficult boss or difficult situation they're trying to navigate. It gives you a source sometimes of just inspiration or a way through, a problem or situation. So that's kind of like maybe from the product manager's viewpoint, or maybe like a designer's viewpoint, or whatever. I think
Mhm.
from a community perspective, I think what it means largely is a lot of different things depending on what the intention of the community is. Some product communities have different goals. Some are there to educate. Others are there to really be focused on their product and what their product does, and so they're more focused on maybe like gathering product feedback or gathering experiences from people utilizing their product, or any number of different things, providing support, that kind of thing. So every community has its different set of goals, and so every community in turn might have a different kind of flavor.
Mhm.
And some communities don't have a clear goal too, which is part of the challenge. You might get there and go like, "Oh, what am I supposed to do in this community, and what is it actually here for?" Right? So I think, like in the context of product people, again, I think the biggest part for me that's really stood out and really been really super valuable is that sense of belonging,
Mhm.
that sense of having a group of people around me that are, I can be inspired by, I can be energized by, that I can be supported by, and that to me is ultimate. Hopefully a good community can support you in that.
Hmm. So you mentioned it, multiple frames where we can kind of see what a community is.
Mhm.
You spoke about it as a source of inspiration, a way for people to feel a sense of belonging. Some cases, even a coping mechanism, perhaps, to some difficulties that are happening at work. But there was one in particular that I kind of wanted to probe a little bit more on, where you said a degree of safety, and
Mm.
I want to get your thoughts on what does that mean, especially with a lot of the advancement we're hearing about with AI and maybe the job market, especially when you think about tech, product, digital in general. What does safety look like in the future? Do you have an idea, or maybe you can give me some thoughts? Is that something that will continue to be a concern for people, or is it something that's going to go away? Tell me a little bit more about your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think of safety as maybe more like psychological safety is maybe a way to put it. And I think probably with emerging technology and stuff like that, there's a lot more concern essentially that the thing on the other side of that is actually real,
Hmm.
and not made up. So far in the community space, I'd say like the AI side of things hasn't been wildly embraced, from a technology stack perspective. But no doubt it's going to come. It's going to happen. So whether that's a chat bot that you might be talking to that you think is a human when you're trying to get a support question answered about the product that you're using, or whether you are actually talking to people like in a closed product community of some type. I think like the AI side is, and that psychological safety. I think the important maybe advantage we have in community is that we can put a human face to it,
Hmm.
and we can sort of cut through the clutter a little bit, and we can provide ways in which to connect both digitally and physically in person with each other. And so, it's quite possible that I think that maybe community has an advantage here, a differentiator long term as the technology changes. But I mean, again, it might be prognosticating here a little bit too much.
Fair, fair. Okay. So as organizations kind of look at different means to evolve engagement, I want to ask you, why is it important for organizations to engage in community building? And perhaps for product people, why should they join? And you kind of touched on that a little bit,
Mhm.
and but also contribute to a product community.
Yeah. So I'll start with one sort of thought here, and that's that I don't necessarily think that every organization needs to engage in community building. In
Hmm.
fact, I might argue that too many organizations engage in it without really, again, like a clear strategy plan, and they come at it maybe the wrong way. There's a really great book called Get Together. It's by a woman named Bailey Richardson, I believe is her name.
Okay.
It's published by Strike Press, and there's a few other co-authors as part of that. Sorry, I can't remember their names off the top
Oh,
of my
it's
head,
okay.
but there's a core principle of that book that I think is really wonderful, and I try to bring into a lot of the stuff that I do, and that's that you build community with, not for. And too many organizations start by building community for people. It's kind of the
Hmm.
equivalent of like I built the baseball diamond and I'm expecting everybody to show up and play baseball. And
Hmm.
maybe the community says, I don't want to play baseball. I want to play soccer. Uh,
Hmm.
um,
Sure.
and so I think what we need to do as organizations is take the time, no different than when we build products, is to understand the core underlying problems and needs, wants, desires, pain points, whatever you want to frame it as, that our community is dealing with. And then figure out really a few kind of simple things. How do we find the people that are matching that pain point, problem, etc.? How do we get them to do something together? And then how do we get that group talking? So that community could be you, me, and two other people. It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
500 people, 5,000 people, 10,000 people, whatever. That's really the foundation here of doing that. Once you kind of got those three building blocks, that kind of initial wheel spinning, then it's really just about attracting new people and really elevating those people that are doing stuff inside your community onto the stage, right? So I think like you, as me, as an example, you talked at the beginning about the
Mhm.
story about how we met. Yes, it came through, hey, I'm running an event, but that then turns into, hey, maybe you're part of my community and answering someone else's question, or maybe you're sharing a really helpful
Mhm.
resource from something you're doing in your practice. Even just getting on stage in an event kind of situation and sharing your approach and your thinking about how you're tackling your craft as a product manager could be super, super valuable on that end. So I think coming back to your question here is like, how should organizations engage? I think it's really they should engage carefully. They should engage because there's actually a real need for it, and then they should figure out the value they're going to go and add for that as part of it. As far as like product people kind of joining and contributing to a community, that's going to come in a lot of different shapes. Jacob
Mhm.
Nielsen, I'm sure you've know him from the
Mhm.
UX kind of world, has a famous rule out there. It's called the 99 1 rule. It's basically, or 99-10 or something like that. But it's, yeah, basically 99-1 is what it is, I think. But it's basically 90% of your community is not going to say anything. They're
Mhm.
probably going to be super quiet. They're going to be the lurkers in the background, probably reading posts every now and then or checking in on stuff when they get time, but they're not going to be super engaged. 9% of that community is probably going to do something. They're going to maybe attend a few events. They're maybe going to chime in every now and then with a post or a shared resource of some kind, or they're going to, maybe lean in to participate in a program that you're running.
Mhm.
And then 1% is probably going to do most of it. So,
See.
like, if you look at this kind of community dynamic, that's a lot that get echoes a lot in a lot of communities. If you actually kind of look at a lot of people's metrics, not every community member is actually engaged. I mean, I was really fortunate to run a community at Product Board that I built and developed and stuff like that grew into a place that was much healthier than that, in some ways. But I think it's really interesting to watch a lot of community leaders struggle, thinking that they have to have everybody involved. And it's really interesting to watch people who join communities that thinks everybody has to be involved, because we all involve ourselves in different ways, right? Maybe all I want to do is answer today's poll question. Maybe all I want to do is, see what these 10 really outspoken folks in your community have to say. Maybe I just want to, learn from all your content, but I don't want to ever show up inside the actual community itself, right? Again, there's lots of different ways that people can show up and participate and do things. But community takes a lot of energy from a lot of different people. Not everybody has that same energy they want to apply. Not everybody wants to be on a stage or on a podium. And you need to figure out ways in which to give each of those different audiences ways in which to participate in your community. There's going to be people who do stuff some of the time, and you want to certainly try to build that group up and move them more towards being that final group that maybe is participating all the time or doing a lot of the stuff in the community.
I was going to ask you, you mentioned a number of times success and measuring success of a community. And I wanted to ask you more specifically, how do you measure the success of a community? And what are the biggest challenges in building and growing a product community to begin with?
That's an interesting one. Um, I think it depends a lot on like the purpose of your community. But if you think of it like, here's a really simple way to think about it. Think about it in the context of like a customer life cycle, right? We start off by sort of acquiring people. There's that kind of consideration, conversion, kind of onboarding phase. There's that retention, expansion, loyalty, and advocacy phase. And so, if you're taking this as a product, how would you
Mhm.
measure success across that, right? Like the awareness side would be, is my marketing from outbound, my brand being recognized as a, you know, and how do you generate that awareness? Well, that awareness can come in a lot of different forms, right? You might do that through, you know, outbound marketing. You might do that through certain content. You might do that through all kinds of different ways. When I think of like you're considering my community, I might measure success by the percentage of people who come into my community, maybe landing page, and choose to actually come and join my community,
Mm.
and actually convert, right? If I look at the onboarding, it might be the sort of like with that, my success there might be how many of those people can I keep, from disappearing, not being sort of engaged in some way, whether that's showing up with an emoji thumbs up or participating in an event, but like how do I keep them sort of involved in that end? And then that retention expansion side of it, maybe that's a little bit of like how I pull you into like those events and conversations. And again, like there's so many different ways to look at this. Like as an example, if I was running a community whose focus was very focused on its product, that retention and expansion goal might be very focused on how do I keep you, like the NRR and GR kind of like how do I retain you from churning as a customer? How do I keep you renewing so that you've got good, solid knowledge around the product and the work that you do? And then how can it be like an eyes and ears to help kind of like upgrade and upsell you on further capabilities in our product, right?
Hmm.
Which would be very different than if I was running a community that's focused on practice of product, right? So I think there's like, I guess maybe what I'd answer your question is like, I think the health of a community has a lot of the same metrics as the health of a good product.
Hmm.
And how you choose to measure that, whether that's over a customer life cycle, whether you choose to measure that over, pirate metrics, any kind of number of different like things that are out there as frameworks, is kind of up to you. But ultimately, it comes down to like, what's the purpose of your community? What's the, ultimately the goals you're trying to drive, and what are the right metrics to go and look at that? What a great example of this is a friend, Esther Trapido, who runs the community at Amplitude called Cohort.
Hmm.
And she really thinks a lot about this stuff, like from pure like data analytics Amplitude perspective. They're really thinking about this whole entire like north. They've got a clear North Star metric, right? The community there is trying to influence that North Star metric. So then it's like, what are the tactics and strategies and different things that we can do inside the community that are actually going to contribute to that from a business standpoint? And those things often are very difficult to measure
Hmm.
sometimes in some cases. Other cases are very easy. They're really simple. Like, I mean, counting like say awareness, like number of new members, number of members that are active. That's, relatively easy in most tools in some way, like even if it's, Slack out of the box. Whereas like, sometimes being able to like attribute like something like, because I had these 18 conversations in these 6 different places with this person that led to a sale, that could be really
Yeah.
tough, right? To quantify. I mean, no different than maybe any other problem that other teams have.
Yeah, it's always the challenge with having multiple variables that influence one outcome and being able to attribute that clearly
Yeah.
and with
Yeah.
confidence. Yeah.
Yeah. And increasingly, like, I mean, again, like community isn't just the community you own either, right? Community is kind of like, for lack of a better word, everywhere. And so, community could be someone talking about your brand or your product in someone else's community, right? Like we frequently saw that when I was at product board. It might be somebody in Lenny's community or TPMA or somebody looking for something even that our product solves for as a problem. And the question there is, how do you start showing up in those communities, right? And how do you measure success of that? I mean, that's very difficult in a lot of cases. In some cases, you can make it, a direct attribution. You maybe refer an opportunity because you had a really interesting conversation with someone. But a lot of cases, it's kind of soft.
Hmm. Um, I wonder what is the role of a community lead? If someone is thinking, like, what do they actually do?
Boy, that's a tough one. Because I don't think it's the same everywhere, to be
Hmm.
honest. Community teams, I think in some ways aren't really all that different from product teams. We're a really small headcount. Most community teams are one person in some
Hmm.
cases. Like I ran, product boards, product makers community as a single individual. So everything that you saw that came out of that place was me.
Hmm.
Whereas the organization I'm in now, we're a slightly larger team, but each of us have different focus areas and places in where we're playing. So the role of a community lead can take a lot of different role aspects to it. Again, also based on the focus of your community and what it's there to do. But core of it probably, um, at one part here is bringing those people closer to you and your brand, or you and your product, and kind of what you're doing. The tactics at which you might apply could be very different there. So what the community leader actually like leans into or does to make that happen. But I think to a large degree, it's about creating kind of like connection and reach where your potential members are. It's providing some kind of value to those people when they actually show up. And again, that could take lots of different directions. And then it's, really kind of like supporting them in doing what they need to do successfully. Whether that's, they're trying to upskill in their practice, whether that's they're trying to use your product, whether that's they're trying to, avoid a problem with your product and what it does. So, which is why I think, if you were to look at job descriptions for community leads, you'd see
Hmm.
maybe lots of similar kinds of things or different things out there.
When earlier in our conversation, when you spoke about that psychological safety and going for inspiration and the reasons why someone might join a community, makes me wonder: is there a community for community builders or leads?
There is, yeah, surprisingly quite a few of them,
Okay.
which is kind of interesting. Some of those are run by vendors that essentially run community software.
Hmm.
So there's definitely places like that, and again, they may have different focuses, right? In some cases, I'll use an example. I used a platform from a company called Gainsight, which was previously called Insighted. They have a community built around the people that are using their software. It's very focused on a mission of support and product. So it's got two kind of angles to it. So the support side, obviously, how do I kind of questions? How do you do this? Right, speeds up, eliminates a bit of ticket creation, maybe
Hmm.
with their support team because you can self-serve, you can find answers quicker. There's a degree of that maybe in there too that's like giving product feedback, like, hey, I really need a feature that does X, Y, or Z. Here's the capabilities I need, that kind of thing. There's also communities that are very focused on like the practice of community building. Like a really great example is Nikki's community called the Community Community, which is actually she kind of takes in like cohorts of people. You have to apply to actually become part of the community. There's a certain criteria to actually even enter it, and she's trying to create what I would describe as a very safe space for people in this industry, to exchange ideas and do stuff. And maybe something that's been missing from a lot of the community conversation too is representation of the diversity of our community and the diversity of our landscape. Right. I'm the classic white cis male, I guess you could say, and it's comes with its own things, but I think sometimes the community space, much like the product space, doesn't represent the diversity
Hmm.
there. And I think some people are being very intentional about that, representing that diversity and giving a voice for people to be heard and a voice for people to be put on a pedestal a little bit more. And I think that's a really important attribute of communities like that. I mean, there's other ones, like I said, that are more kind of maybe industry focused. Like CMX is, one. Community Club is another that was formed a while ago. But yeah, it's definitely. I mean, maybe the funny part about that is it's like super meta, right? It's very much
Hmm.
like the product board one. It's like a product management community for product managers talking about product management. Like it's kind of gets a little bit, like looping, but at the same time,
Yeah.
it's great to have an audience. Like I use that audience a lot to turn to and do, hey, I'm struggling with this particular thing in my practice or craft. What can you tell me about how you've approached this? That could be super great to get that transparency. At the same time, it can also be super helpful. Like when I lost my job, to
Hmm.
go into a community of that type, whether it be a vendors community or somewhere else, and say like, hey, I'm looking for a job. Do you know
Hmm.
anybody?
Hmm.
Or I'm available or whatever. And it also be a great place for me to show up and just contribute my thoughts and my experience, right? So someone else might have a question about something or somebody's curious. Like I was in a community this week, called Uncommon, which is run by one of our vendors, Common Room. And someone there was asking about how they run like their product beta programs. And I could come out and say, like, here, here's exactly the playbook that we ran, right? And by the way, here's the guy that's now doing this stuff at Product Board. Go talk to him. Here's some other
Hmm.
things that are I kind of consider about this as you're kind of running it. Here's some things that we ran into, some, the kind of maybe the stories you don't hear from the trenches a little bit, and get that person maybe off into a better spot when they're building their situation, right?
Absolutely. I want us to take a short break. And when
Sure.
we're back, I'll be asking you a little bit more about two things that you kind of touched on: helping others and getting help, which I took notes about. But also, I want to
Mhm.
dive in a little bit deeper into personally for you, what do you enjoy most and maybe least about being a community leader. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. Hey there, my amazing product people. If you're trying to find your own story with product, design, and leadership, gain a new perspective on being human in a soulless corporate world, and possibly have a good laugh in the process, you can grab your very own copy of my latest book, Product People, A Journal of Laughter and Tears. It's available on Amazon in all formats right now. Happy reading. Well, let's continue where we left off. I wanted to ask you kind of two-part question. You mentioned helping others and getting help, and I kind of want to bring that closely to what I think might be a related question around as being a community leader. What do you enjoy the most and the least about this? I want to say a role, but this kind of space.
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe I'll frame it in a couple of different ways, but I think the core of what I really, really love about it is the people part of it.
Hmm.
So maybe I bring this back to your brand, right? And what you're doing. Like you're talking about product people and the importance of people and the people dynamic inside the work that we do. So that human connection, whether it be virtual or in person, I really, really love. I get a lot of energy from it. It's quite fun. At the same time, it can be incredibly exhausting at times when
Hmm.
there's too much of that. So I need like, I guess you could say I feed off that energy, but at the same time, then I also need my quiet time to kind of like recover. I can get too much of it and get overcharged and maybe overbuilt up around it. So it's really important to have that thoughtful space to kind of, I guess, recover when you put all your energy into something. Like
Hmm.
getting on a stage as a speaker is a great example of this, right? I know you did a couple of sessions for us at some of our mini conferences when I was at Product Board, and you get up there and you talk for an hour. That's afterwards you're pretty wiped. You're
Hmm.
kind of done, right? So
True.
you can imagine the inverse of that of trying to do that kind of a job for like 8 hours a day. I think a lot of community people too, depending on the type of role you have, the type of place you're doing community can take a lot of different like stressors and dynamics. I can't imagine being someone that's maybe more of a community moderator on something like Facebook or something like that. You're probably coming into contact with lots of content in some communities. It's very difficult uh,
Hmm.
to have to read, to have to engage with, that may be touching difficult subjects or subjects even close to your own personal life and situation. But, I'm fortunate I don't have to do that kind of thing. But I think like I'm going to come back a little bit here to like what I like the most. I like the people. I like the energy. I like helping people. I like having them create like connections with each other, and I enjoy being able to add value to the work that they do, and build some relationships. Right. I mean, there's a lot of people from funny enough, like I had virtual coffee the other day with somebody from our old community because they reached out. Like there's I've built relationships, which is a ton of fun.
Hmm.
But where that least part comes in can be sometimes I'm the sole practitioner. It's all the work that's put on me, all the pressure of that. Maybe the least part sometimes is fighting for that understanding, that attention of the value that community can add to certain
Hmm.
organizations. And maybe that's no different than a product manager, right? Like in the sense, we spend a lot of our time not just building our roadmaps, but advocating for the decisions that we're going to make and why we've made those decisions over others. And that takes a lot of time, a lot of energy out of people, right? And can for some people can be super energizing, and for other people can be super deflating.
Yeah, I think one of my major takeaways just listening to you is framing community as a product, and you kind of touched on that in many of your
Yeah,
answers.
I mean, I've always done it. I've always treated it like, I mean, again, like anything you build to me, I think is rooted in the discovery of understanding a core problem. And if you're not solving for that problem, I don't know why people would buy it if it was a product. And I don't know why they would show up for it in a community if it wasn't adding value, right? Like,
Mhm. True. Now, with your fascinating pivots throughout your career, I want to maybe get your advice on people out there that want to transition into product community building. Maybe their backgrounds are in product management, design, might be something else. But what advice would you give to them?
um, I think the first part would be largely be clear on your purpose. Like, what are you there for? I think a lot of people have spun up communities. It's really easy in some ways to spin up a community, and other ways maybe a little more difficult. But I think the core of it, like you can grab a Slack workspace URL and invite a bunch of people into it very quickly, right? But to get them to do anything and get them to come back is very difficult if you don't have a clear purpose and reason. Because what that would result in likely is people joining that community that don't belong there, or people not feeling like they've found their sort of tribe, their audience, and will make it very difficult for you to go off and find the people that do belong. So my
Mhm.
advice would be like first, like just be clear on like the why, maybe, I guess is a way to put
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
um, and who you're kind of building for. And then the second part of that is, maybe coming back to what I mentioned earlier about the book from Get Together, is like really being clear on like, so what are we going to do together? Like, what are we here to do? Are we here just to chit chat about the weather? Are we here to, what's our intention of getting all these group of people together, and what do they, for that matter, what do they want to do together? I think I'd really want to know that. And then after that, getting them talking, the rest will kind of take care of itself, right? Use a really great example. There's a great Vancouver design community run here on Slack, and it's a group of people that work in the design industry in the UX kind of space, and they've done a fantastic job of bringing that audience together, right? It was a lot of people that were very early in their design careers, and maybe the pain points or problems they were kind of hearing was that people were having difficulty like meeting other practitioners or figuring out like how to do their work best. They were struggling maybe to find work and jobs and that kind of thing, and they were a ton of people that were like yearning for like in-person interaction. Surprisingly, right? Obviously coming out of COVID too, like a lot of us,
Mm-hmm.
sheltered at home and all that kind of stuff, but people were really craving for that. And so what did they do? I mean, they launched a few regular events that were just like social events to bring people together to meet, to create connections, right? And that, all that stuff that they're doing starts to spill over into that virtual community as well, into that Slack channel. So now it's like, you're creating connections between different people that maybe you wouldn't have connected before. And that builds a stronger design space or design industry, I guess you could say, and a design community out here in Vancouver. And, that can lead to healthy work relationships. It can lead to all kinds of things along the way, right? Mentorship, whatever it might be. So I think, maybe the advice again, like for people trying to look at the transitioning of into this role, is a little bit of like, is this for you? Do you get your energy from helping other people? Is there something that you really want to like add value to? Is there a place or a space or whatever that you can create that's gonna add that value today? And for that matter, is there too much of it today out there too, right? Or there are like, if there's like 10 other design communities, do we need another design community? Like maybe this isn't the design community you need to build, but maybe you need to build a design community for, a really niche group of that audience, right? Maybe it's like, I don't know, UX designers based in Toronto who are women only, as an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Might be super valuable to a group of women that are struggling in that space if that was in fact something that other people were struggling with. But yeah, that's kind of my direction. I mean, this career, this switch, like again, I think as I mentioned at the beginning, was very unintentional. I didn't come into this with like, I'm going to be a community person, or I've got some deep rooted career path to become a community person. It's kind of been very accidental. But what I've leaned into in that maybe are the things that were part of the joy that I really got out of the work that I did as a product manager or as a UX designer, and tried to lean into those further. And maybe people telling me that, oh, like this was valuable, this was good, do more of that,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of a reason why I've continued to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Continuing with the theme of advice, because I think it's important, especially to put it in context of the current situation. I described the product job market as challenging for many seekers out there. And
Mm.
given your experience, I wanted to also hear from you. What advice do you have for product people on the market now looking for their next role?
Oh man. Um, yeah, by no means will I be the person to give that advice in some ways, but I guess first of all, I'll kind of frame it maybe in a really simple way. I think now is a good time as any
Mm,
to make a decision whether actually product is in fact the passion that you have. Obviously the job landscape has changed. Um, is this a time for the pivot? Right? Is it time for the find something different, find something that's more inspiring? Have you been just doing the product job, I guess, maybe because it was a paycheck and it was easy money and, you could do no wrong, and like, is it really there? So I think that's like the
mm,
first part, is like maybe a gut check of like, is this the place that I feel best, that I'm doing my best work and that I'm going to add the most value to, right? The other lens on this, maybe I'd kind of say, is kind of how I framed maybe my own job search. I applied what I kind of called the three Ps. the first part of this was it a really interesting or compelling product? I think for any of us, whether it's product managers, designers, whatever, marketers, even for that matter, anybody working with a product, I think if it's not compelling, that's going to
Mm,
show up in all the work that you do every single day. Like you're going to be like, I'm not inspired by this. So the work you're going to do is going to be not inspired. Like you're not going to show up for the customers in the right way. You're not going to be excited about going to the office. You're not going to be excited about showing up online for that discovery interview. And you're going to be, pixel pushing for largely, I
mm,
guess you could
mm,
say, maybe as a designer. And so that's the first part is like, yeah, the product has got to be compelling. The second part was, does it solve interesting problems? So you could have a really compelling product, but it's not solving really anything, like from a market need perspective or otherwise. And so, that to me can sometimes be a warning sign of like this is not actually going to have any like long tail. It's not going to be around long enough. It's going to probably fail. It's doesn't have a good product market fit. Maybe that's a challenge for you too, in the sense of like, how can I figure out to make this get product market fit? But depending on like, I like to look at it as like, does it have a compelling problem? And the last part of that to me largely comes down to the people. Are the people around this really great people to work with? Are the people that I'm meeting, is the people around it as customers, that kind of stuff, really enthusiastic and energized. Those are all, I guess, the three big signals I look for. The second part, maybe is a piece of advice, or third part, maybe is a piece of advice, is not to get too down on yourself. A lot of what we're all facing, I think, in the job search space right now, particularly as product people, is the challenging environment, like macroeconomically, combined with a bunch of other factors that are going on. And I think we need to be fair to ourselves in that maybe
mm.
like why we find ourselves in this position of having to look for work is because of factors that are like largely outside of our control, and to focus on the factors that are actually in our control. And so, that could be maybe it's like maybe there were weak spots or attributes of your skill set that need some more effort or more energy behind it, and maybe you can spend some time retraining or refocusing on some of that, or talking to other people that are doing that work really well, like just finding a way to become better. And then the other part of this too is just making sure you take time for yourself a little bit. There's I'm trying to remember her name. Her name, like, she goes by Coach Erica, but she had a recent post a while back, and I leveraged that through my job search. That was on sort of the like 4 hour job search. Like it was really like focused on like your day, and so it was like 4 hours of really intense work on the job search, largely focused on building pipeline. Getting the resumes out that you had for the pipeline you had built maybe the prior day or whatever, and then curating those relationships and honing that kind of networking side to really drum up opportunities and stuff. And then it was taking 4 hours just for yourself to go do something, like go for a
Mm,
walk, play some music, read a book, just take your head off I guess, the job search thing, because it can feel sometimes like that's like the entirety of your life.
sure.
Now, I'm going to say that too because it comes with a lot of interesting angles, right? Some people don't have maybe the privilege of severance, and so they
Mm,
have a ton of fiscal pressures, right? So maybe the other 4 hours is taking some of that fiscal pressure off. Maybe it is like getting, a part-time job somewhere. Maybe it's driving Uber, maybe it's doing whatever, but it's like something to basically disconnect you from the job task and put yourself in a slightly better space to be better prepared to show up the next day.
mm. This is very valuable. I really like the three P's, the product, problem,
Thanks.
people part. As you were saying, I was always thinking about a fourth P to add, and the one that came to mind was prototype. Just because
Oh, that's a good idea.
I feel like prototype can also be applicable to experiences sometimes, where you can,
Mhm.
get to try, how would I feel commuting to this job, or what is it like to work there, maybe by speaking to someone that already has a job in that
Yeah.
place. So it's interesting, and I
Yeah. Or
really
even
like.
kind of prototyping out what that job would look like, right? Like what might a day of my life look like in this kind of organization doing this kind of work?
True, true. I also really like what you said about being kind to yourself, because some of us may have that tendency to, I don't want to say beat ourselves up, but also feel that sense of guilt or doubt that comes throughout the
Oh, without a
process.
doubt.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, this has been emotionally really hard on a lot of people, right? I
mm,
mean, for lack of a better word, I've worked at companies where they've described the team like a family, and I've worked at companies where they describe the team like a team, like a football team. And if you think of it as in the construct of a sports team or a football team or something like that, you can trade players anytime. And so it's no hard feelings, but I might shift you to another team, or I might decide you're no longer best suited to be our outfielder, or whatever, right? And so because we bring our whole selves sometimes to work, and we try to put like the family dynamic maybe around some of the people that we work with, and we get to know the people that we're doing, and we build relationships. That kind of change can be really super hard, right? Like for me, losing this last job was challenging, because I had put a lot of personal energy into the community itself. But it was also super interesting to watch that community rally around my departure and say, like, wow, this is shocking. I'm really disappointed to see this. You added so much value to my career. Lots of great comments and stuff like that when I did a post on LinkedIn too, even. And that meant a ton, right? I mean, that was maybe like the energy that refilled the tank for me to go find my next role. So just being really, again, like careful of yourself, I think is super important, because a lot of people just, don't take the moment to care for themselves.
No, absolutely. So I 100% agree with that, and I think that part about the 4 hours to do something else, it's quite helpful, especially around channeling some of the energy, because what do you do the next day? You had all this energy and you were putting it into something, and then all of a sudden it's all pent up, and if it's not challenged appropriately, it may create some anxiety around it. So it's very important. I really like that.
Yeah.
I'm happy we spoke about it. And I wanted to ask you, given how much I learned about you even more in this conversation, and how much you care about helping others and building relationships, what is the best way for people to learn more about your work and connect with you?
Best way is probably through LinkedIn at this point. I've
Okay.
kind of fallen off the Twitter bandwagon, although I was quite active on Twitter in the past. But yeah, LinkedIn's definitely, it's linkedin.com/Benry. BENRY is my handle. And I'm the same on Twitter. That's probably the best places, I think. The work that I'm doing now is maybe less product management focused, so maybe not be relevant to everybody, but you're more than welcome also to check us out at hivemq.com to see what we're doing in our community space.
Awesome, awesome. I realized you didn't make the change from Twitter to X, but I think that's a lot of us still.
I refuse.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. All right. Well, Scott, this conversation was meaningful and fun, and I want to say thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the Product People podcast.
no problem. Anytime. Happy to.
I'd like to extend my gratitude to our awesome guest, Scott Baldwin, for sharing his valuable insights on community building. During our conversation, we spoke about defining your community's purpose, thinking of a community as a product, and building strong relationships in the process. I found Scott's insight to be meaningful, practical, and fun, and I hope you did too. I want to express my gratitude to all our listeners. Your support means the world to me. If you found today's episode valuable, please hit subscribe, leave a review, or share this podcast with your friends. I also encourage you to share your feedback and your ideas on what topics you'd like to hear about next on this podcast. Your input is very important as it helps me learn and improve. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes, and until next time, stay courageous, creative, and compassionate. Take care.